We are here today with Ximena Alarcón.
Alarcón.
Alarcón?
Almost.
Almost?
Yeah.
Very close. We're sitting in the middle of Garden of Penises, her exhibition here at PRPG.mx in Mexico City. The exhibition has been open for a couple of weeks, and we have this grand event coming up for the Gallery Week in Mexico City, so I'm super excited about that. New space opening, new artists, the residency returning, these incredible sculptures, which I think are probably some of the most dramatic and eye-catching sculptures that we've had in the gallery spaces.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw your work during Zona Maco, you did a presentation in Roma, and I got the opportunity to see your work. I was just blown away by just the volume of work, the quality of the work, and the way that you present your work as well. The amount of detail that you put into the work is amazing.
Thank you.
How long have you been an artist?
I just all my whole life.
Your entire life? So
yeah, just my whole life.
You came out drawing and singing and dancing, or
no? I used to draw when I was a kid,
mm-hmm.
and then I guess through life I found different creative ways
mm-hmm.
in different things like cooking or jewelry. Now this kind of work.
And did your family, do you come from a family of artists, or?
Not really. I come from a family of doctors.
Doctors? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're in opposition. I think there's a lot of continuity between medical, scientific processes and artistic processes.
Well, it's creation. It's creative anyway. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I often think about the idea of you create a baseline with your materials, you understand how they work, and then you experiment and discover new things. You document that, then you move on to the next thing. So to me, that's scientific process.
Yeah, it's part of it. Yeah, definitely.
So it's never an abstraction to me when people say, "Oh, I grew up in a family of scientists," or programmers or something like that, and then their child turns out to be this intensely, fabulously creative artist. You're like, yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, you expect it. If you're born into a family of theater majors, you're like, oh, they're going to be an actor or something, and then they become an accountant. So, my mother is a programmer and an accountant,
Yeah.
And so she looks at me and she's like, where did this come from? How did that develop? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe in opposition to you, mother.
That also happened. No, but my father was a real lover of art.
Okay.
And architecture and everything that included human intervention and work and development, especially in the arts and science, obviously.
You grew up in Mexico, or?
I grew up in Mexico City, yeah.
Mexico City, okay.
Yeah.
And you've lived in Paris for
20 years.
For 20 years, and Lima, Peru?
And Lima for 5 years.
For 5 years.
Yeah.
Do you have studios in each of these cities, or do you primarily work here?
I primarily work here and in Lima,
mm-hmm.
and in France I work less now in France. I made all my jewelry work in France for almost 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And favorite city?
Mexico City.
Mexico City. Oh, good answer. All right. # Mexico City.
Really, I've always wanted to come back.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What compels you? What are your favorite things about Mexico City?
Well, I guess I grew up here, and I guess the dynamics, the way you talk with people and the way you interrelate with people. And I just love it. I just feel myself here.
I love the informalness of Mexico City.
Yeah.
For a grand city with this much culture and everything, you go to I go to Paris, and I love Paris, adore Paris, but there are aspects of the culture and the coldness of it that make me think, oh, I'd rather be in Mexico City.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Guangzhou, China, working, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go back to Mexico City.
No, I understand. Yeah, I like the dynamics in Mexico City, the way people relate. I really feel alive. I think there's a thing about life and death, which is always present in Mexico in general, and I like that. We're on the edge. I think we're on the edge all the time.
I agree. It's like something about living in the basin of a volcano and like the earthquakes and like this. There's this thread of like the end of everything all the time that just perfectly aligns itself with Mexican culture. Like it's like a celebration of death and life and like the sort of temporal nature of everything.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, I agree. And yeah, you're in the edge all the time, so you feel alive. I think you feel very alive.
Right.
And things are not as organized as they are in France, for example,
Right.
and it's like square and this, and so that makes it very lively also.
Do you think that formalness in like the United States and Europe and those sort of things, do you think that affects creativity or for you, like personally, do you feel more creative in like Latin America than you do in Europe or?
No, maybe just changes what you want to say.
Mm-hmm.
But really my experience is France is more in jewelry.
Mm-hmm.
So jewelry is a very ruled by métier, like a work that you have to go very by the book because you're working with very valuable stuff and it's very regulated and controlled. Mm-hmm. So, and it's jewelry, so you have to wear it, so you have to hold these constraints in what I did in Europe. But I don't think creatively the fact of being in France affected me or I was less creative. I was just like, in the contrary, I wanted like to reivindicate who I was through my work. Mm-hmm. So no, I don't think it affects the coldness and it's hard to break through and make your work be understood by people which are used to very classical jewelry, you have all these brands but then you just have to insist and keep on working and then I got some nice clientele in France and very faithful clients, and I got to do what I wanted to do. Do what I wanted to do.
Well, I think that's the most important part of creativity is like the ability to pursue what ignites that passion for you. So, how did you go from jewelry to this?
To this?
That's
nice question. Well, already my jewelry was very sculptural.
Okay.
Very geometric. So at a certain point, the Mexican sculptor came to France and saw my jewelry, and he asked me to make an exhibition in his foundation here. Mm-hmm. And I always liked sculpture very much. I was very interested, and my jewelry was very sculptural. So I just said yes. And he first asked me to make jewelry, an exhibition of jewelry in his foundation. And when I got there and I showed him my maquettes for some pieces of jewelry, he was like, "This is very sculptural. Why don't you make sculpture?"
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So he saw it in you before you saw it in yourself, or?
No, I knew it was very sculptural, but he really saw the sculpture part, and he said, "Why don't we make a sculpture exhibition instead of a jewelry exhibition?"
And what were the characteristics of that sculpture? Like, how did that? Like, was it similar to what you're working on now, or?
No. It's very geometrical. I used to work a lot with squares and rectangles and make compositions of movement, and so sorry. So I just started making, he proposed that and I just said, okay, great. I always wanted to make sculpture. So I just started making maquettes, like jewelry size maquettes of different pieces. And we ended up making a sculpture exhibition and there were a few pieces of jewelry.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah. So that's how I started, and like it was very well received by the people that went and the press, and I had a few press releases and things like that, articles. So it just boosted me to keep on going. And then how I ended up doing things like this, it's just like, it just came afterwards. I had been doing jewelry for a long time, then sculpture, very geometrical and very in a way formal.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to say something more. I needed
Right.
to express something that really moved me. So I started making my collage. You saw those collages,
Mm-hmm.
the Desahuciados series. I started doing them at that moment because I was feeling very like in between Mexico and France. I was like feeling like pulled one by one and the other, and I was like in a very internal identity conflict.
Was the internal conflict about like having family in multiple places, or was it about elements of the culture that you missed or desired in different places, or?
It was more about feeling like a foreigner
Uh-huh.
in France. Like even after 15 years, feeling still like a foreigner and speaking French perfectly, feeling still like a foreigner,
Mm-hmm.
and feeling that I needed to justify myself all the time.
Mm.
So I started working on that in these collages that I used to link. I linked the drawings with text. I was writing like everything I was feeling at the moment. That I like just
Processing it.
yeah.
Huh. I like the immediacy of that ideal as well.
Yeah.
I mean, because process becomes very, very important. I love to write. I like writing my thoughts out. I've never put my own text into the pieces. I haven't really. That's never naturally come to me that way. Did you just start putting the text into it? Like you're just like, oh, here's an element. Oh, let's collage this in too, and it just worked for you? I mean,
it was very strange. I just like felt like compelled to do it,
mm-hmm.
and I just put like some sheets of paper, put them one on top of each other, make this drawing like of lines like a cage, and then I moved it around and repositioned them, and I started linking them with what I was thinking at the moment, with all these things that were hurting or making me uncomfortable for a long time.
Right.
So I just started linking everything. And in a way, this drawing was like myself being torn apart and getting my ideas straight with the text. That's the way I see, like while I'm talking to you, I'm starting to understand it.
Right, yeah. I mean, I as you're describing it, I see it in like the pieces we have upstairs here too. Even if it, like in some ways, the work upstairs here feels a little bit like more formal than what you're saying. The structure of it is more formal. The organization of it, the visuals of it have a graphic appeal to them. I mean, that's kind of what attracted me to the work initially, was the fact that you had it in this very like deconstructed old colonial house, and then you have these like beautiful graphic sculptures and collages and things, and so it was just like there's this contrast. And I thought, what would that look like, in a white wall space like this as well?
It looks nice.
Yeah, and it is so like that kind of flexibility within the work is really interesting to me. What are the messages that like you're working with conceptually with these sculptures? Like,
well,
it's a very heavy one, right?
It's not a fun subject.
Well,
did you know that?
Well, I know,
it's
but
called the Garden of Penises.
Right, the Garden of
Penises.
Penises.
That you know,
Right.
and the Garden of Penises or Penises? How do you
Penises
say?
in English,
Penises, yeah.
but in Spanish it would be
Jardín de los Penes.
okay. Jardín de los Penes.
De los Penes.
Okay.
And these pieces actually talk about sexual abuse.
Okay.
So, the way this series was born, it's very strange. It was born. I was picking like driftwood in Lima, in the coast, and I just started picking these driftwoods that looked like penises, and it's actually a funny anecdote because a friend I was with she just told me like we usually pick conchas.
Right.
In the beach, and now we're picking up palos.
Yeah.
So it was funny, like
so you start to do these pieces around the ideal of rape. You're finding these pieces of wood. the shapes are coming out of it organically, or are you going into you intended them to look like penises, or did they just sort of come out that way and you went with that?
In that specific piece that it's the one that opens like a box and that has all these driftwood penises. I carved them a little bit and then used them the way they were and positioned them in the way. And I was thinking about doing a more geometrical thing because I'm very used to work with squares and rectangles. Right. But then it evolved into the sphere. It evolved into a sphere because the material was very good to, like, the steel spheres. It seems like for me a great material to reflect the bodies.
Well, and it creates the graphic shape, but it also creates a world.
Yeah.
Like it's this individual world, and so like in some instances everything is inside of it. Sometimes the penis is coming out of it and going into another shape. So it's to me like this idea of like violence and within sex and sexuality can be isolated into its own world, and so I think that's also a primary reason why we don't have conversations about it, is because everything's isolated into its own world. It's compartmentalized. So it releases us from the obligation of talking about the experience as well, or allowing people. Well, also, what I find intensely fascinating about this is that if you don't have the context of the name or even the description, you look at these and they're gorgeous objects, like.
Yeah, which is a paradox in a way.
Right, that paradox is really interesting to me because I often think about, like, there's all these difficult conversations that we can have within art, and I think sometimes we put the difficult in front of the beauty, and then we lose the audience. Like Cuckoo walking away from us right now.
Yeah, he doesn't like to talk about this.
I don't really want to talk about this. I'm a little uncomfortable. I'm going to leave. But there's something very beautiful about this ideal that you can create an object that allows people to come into the beauty and then have the conversation that's behind it conceptually.
Yeah.
Is that intentional for you, or?
I think I needed to talk about it, and I think sometimes going directly into a clash, it's not necessarily the good way to talk about things.
Right.
But still, they're very punch in the face.
Right.
Still.
Yes. Yeah.
So I just find this balance in between beauty and something horrible. And it's very strange because for me that goes probably by the hand, like hand by hand with the process of healing. Because I think healing is a beautiful process.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Creating the work that's healing for you.
Yeah. And I think the fact of to heal, to be able to heal, is a beautiful process. And I think that accepting victimhood can be very empowering.
Explain that. What do you mean?
I mean that we have all this notion of all of us, this notion about being a victim as a negative notion.
Sure.
And I think the moment that you acknowledge that you've been a victim of something, that empowers you. Because
sort of like admitting that you're an alcoholic somehow, then empowers you.
Yeah, in a way that makes you take action.
Right. You have to have a starting point to heal from.
Yeah.
And acknowledging that you're
acknowledging
in pain.
is the first. Yeah.
Right.
Is the first point to start healing.
Right. That makes sense.
If you keep on denying rape, alcohol, drug addiction, whatever trauma you have, or you just never acknowledge them and never heal it.
And I think it's interesting that even if you try to ignore something like that, it still comes out. Like even if your work wasn't directly conceptually working within the ideal in healing, it would show up. Like regardless, like it would just show up. Like you can't keep it. It's human expression.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and
It's a necessity. If I don't express it, if I don't say what I have to say, I mean,
you lose your mind.
Or what for? I mean,
right.
I have this thing about doing art just for the aesthetics. I don't see the sense of it anymore.
Right.
I need to say something.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing art just for aesthetics, especially if if for the person creating art, if there's benefits like meditation and their own sense of self comes out of that. I mean, I work with all kinds of different artists, and some of them have that particular leaning. It's really
but it's very personal.
Right.
For me, it wouldn't be possible anymore.
Does it do like? How did you get over the discomfort of the topic that you're working with and presenting it in a public space? Like, were you ever uncomfortable with that, or is it just something you're like, no, I have to tell this story. Like, I'm compelled. I need to, regardless of the way I feel about it.
Good question. No, I don't feel uncomfortable, because I have nothing to be ashamed of.
Oh, of course not. Yeah.
So
that's an interesting.
Yeah.
That's so interesting because with the topic of sexual violence and stuff, there is so much shame. I mean.
Yeah. No, but I'm through that.
Right.
I'm beyond.
Well, yeah. I mean. I'm laughing because I'm thinking about the conversation we had about like the emphasis of the word penises in the title and changing it to garden and stuff. And it made me laugh because I was just like, well, yeah, there's penises, and it's like it's just interesting that I would automatically put that emphasis on that word, but it wasn't. It was only because of the pattern of the other titles and of the other shows, not because. And I was like, "Oh, that's really intriguing that I chose penises to focus on." Okay, and not garden.
I think we both like penises, but in different ways.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Sure. Yeah. Well, there's. Thank God for diversity. So that's how the species survives.
Yes.
I want to ask about the reflective materials because you made a statement about like the audience, the viewer, seeing themselves in that.
Well, that's the voyeur part of the thing. I think nobody wants to talk about rape or sexual abuse or anything, but everybody's watching porn and reading unacceptable things. So I think that confronts people to they're seeing something horrible.
Mm-hmm.
When you're watching this and you understand what it is, you're seeing something horrible. And that confronts people to their own hypocrisy, I think, of just being able to watch things because they're supposedly legal, and being able to do things because they can.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's interesting to confront them to this.
What have the responses been from your audience? Like, what are the variations you get?
I have very...
Anyway, they're all like glasses with errors and stuff, and I'm like, that's my whole thing. I love, like, the more non-conformist an object is, the more I love it.
The more you like it, yeah.
Right. I mean, something about, like, perfect multiples that scare me.
Okay.
It just removes humanity from it, but... I mean, and that ideal of like perfect multiples removing humanity. I mean, these are gorgeous objects that maintain their humanity. Like there's this aspect of it. I mean, obviously there's body parts included in it, but they're abstractions. They're not like, it's not like you're directly seeing legs and then vagina or something, like their objects are beautiful.
Yes, they are.
So it's kind of an interesting way to approach things. We were talking about the idea of the reflection and people seeing themselves within the work.
You were asking me about people's reactions.
Right, and then people's reactions when they see themselves in that. Because I mean, I have to tell you what's interesting to me, especially in the culture today, is that there were like so many Instagram posts like where people were inserting themselves into the reflections, and I was just like,
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was just kind of interesting because it's the culture we live in. Everybody's like, me in front of your artwork, but it's your artwork or something. I have weird issues with that. But I was like, oh, I wonder if they're like aware of like the content of this and like what they're inserting themselves into.
Yeah, I agree. You make me think about these people taking selfies and smiling in front of the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin.
Right.
And you go like, what is it that you didn't get?
Right. Like.
So no, I understand totally. No, I had different reactions. I had people that reacted very well, people that were very, very moved by these pieces and by the gossip pieces also and the video.
Mm-hmm.
And people who had a total rejection. People that were very, very disturbed, but in a bad way. I didn't
because
have
of their
many of those.
because of their own experiences of
I don't
it,
know.
or
I've had people that opened themselves to me about their own experiences and felt free to talk about it, which I think is very nice. And
that's very powerful.
Yeah, it's powerful.
When art inspires somebody to release something personal like that about themselves.
Yeah, and I had very few men that felt very, very uncomfortable and just didn't say anything and left. That you could see that they were not.
They just
like
enjoying
seeing this.
Huh. Interesting.
Men, mostly.
Right, mostly men. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I have some people that were trying like to be empathic with me. And do you say empathic in English?
Empathetic.
Empathetic. Yeah, with me, and that went like, "Oh, this happened to you. I'm so sorry."
Right.
And that I didn't like.
Yeah, I think that's kind of
because
it's like a cultural response that makes them feel better, but doesn't do anything for the other person.
Yeah, because if I'm talking about it, I don't need that. And then I come back to this victim notion, like victim being oh, the poor thing, my dear. And I don't like that. I think being a victim empowers you, like acknowledging what I was telling you.
Right.
So
but that's the starting point. The victim part is the starting point. It's not the outcome.
No.
You're empowering yourself through the process of creating the artwork.
Well, the outcome should be justice for me. But then that's another subject, and that's very, very complicated.
Right. Yeah. Justice is not obviously culturally, like the perception of justice and what justice is changes depending on who you act and ask and where you live and your economic status.
It's very variable and very...
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like one of the things I appreciate in Mexico is how clear that is. There's no escaping that. Like economic status, class status, male, feminine, trans, gay, like all these different things place you somewhere within the spectrum of
being able to get
justice.
Justice, yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah. I guess in the U.S. you have the same.
Yeah, but it's not as, I think the U.S. is so concerned with branding and marketing in a sense, like it's such a big part of the culture that we lose the conversation on that. Like an example would be like the Me Too movement became a brand, a literal hashtag, an expression of this sort of general idea. And sometimes I think that although it gives visibility to the conversation, it also stops the conversation because we have these ideas about what that means. And then we're like, okay, there are 5 categories in which your experience can be applied, and that's it. And so we lose some of the nuance of the experiences of the people who have been violated, or even the conversation with the violator. Like we don't gain an understanding of, like what motivated them, how did they come out of that? How did they heal from that and not repeat the same thing or carry that on to the next generation in their family or...
It's a real cultural problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that problem is everywhere. It's a human issue, but I feel like in Mexico, there's space for that conversation because there's not as much concern about the branding of it, necessarily. That's my impression. I don't know if that's necessarily true.
But I still think the Me Too movement was incredibly an incredible opening for all women in the world.
Yeah.
For me, it was.
Well, I think it shifted the dialogue. It removed the invisibility and the ability of people to just say, "Oh, it doesn't exist."
No, and then when you're an abused person, an abused woman, I think like majority of women have been abused in a way or another.
Mm-hmm.
I think you feel very lonely because you feel you're only the only one, and you feel the shame and you feel the guilt and the Me Too, and seeing all these kinds of women, wonderful, incredible, beautiful actresses, or
Anyone,
myself or
right,
whomever, saying, "Oh, it's not just me; it's everybody." Then it opens this amazing possibility of healing.
absolutely.
It's like a collective healing in a way.
Sure.
No.
Well, telling a story is super important. I mean,
Yeah.
like owning your story and being able to verbalize it or visualize it, or whatever format you choose to express that story in. I mean, that's the power of, that's how you heal. The silence is the issue. This is very hard to be silent. Like, you don't walk in and see this and think, oh, I can just ignore that and just deal with the formal aspects of shape, or how it bends light or something, and you're like, no, you really can't avoid this.
No.
I mean, I was surprised that we didn't get blocked on Instagram. I was like, oh, this is going to cause problems. It'll cause problems. We're going to get deleted or something. We'll get canceled or something like that. But it didn't. People didn't respond to it that way. I think.
No, that's true. That's true.
So that's a very powerful thing. I think that's a shift in culture as well. So that's a benefit of like the Me Too movement, and, the feminism movement.
And the Me Too movement shifted something that I think is very important. I think it put the guilt on people that weren't being accountable for what they were doing, which is like in the top of the pyramid, white, male, heterosexual, very powerful men.
Right.
And I think that shifted the imagery of rape being committed only by the others.
Right.
Otherhood, like the black people, the foreigners, the immigrants,
right.
Mexicans, as Joe said.
Right. It's just like sort of.
Yeah.
So. What's the opposite of deifying something? It's this ideal that you create the other, you project the evil onto another, so that you can't see evil within yourself. And so the Me Too movement exposed that there's this variety and diversity within the violators, and therefore you can't escape it. Like it's not just rich white men in Hollywood or
just black poor men in Harlem.
Right, exactly.
Which is what the imagery would tell you. Like, why are you going to that neighborhood? You're going to get raped.
Right.
Like these people.
Or why are you going to Mexico? You're in danger.
Yes.
Like, it's all these generalizations within cultures that I think are the most destructive, because it doesn't allow the individual expression to be heard.
And I'm not saying that there are no rapists in all of these communities. There's everywhere. There's rape everywhere and abuse everywhere. But I just shifted that. It just opened the possibility of these men, particular very powerful men, using the others as scapegoats and getting away with it. Which, in a way, I think that's the way it functions in Europe and I don't live in the US, so I don't know. I cannot talk about the US.
Well, I'm curious.
In Europe, I think it functions a lot that way. Like the immigrants, the Arabs, and the Africans are like creepy, scary, the Muslims, and it happens everywhere. So,
what are the differences in feminism in Europe and Mexico and Latin America South? Like, what are the differences that you see?
Oh, that's interesting. That's a question. Well, there's this huge tradition of feminism in France, from Simone de Beauvoir and all these thinkers and all the American thinkers, and they're all sometimes in conflict. And what I do think about French feminism, which is the one that I know a lot, there's different currents of feminism, but there is the one that thinks it's universal, and I think that's very French. This notion of the French being I'm thinking in French, sorry.
That's all right.
The land of human rights.
Ah, okay.
Like, you know, like the precursores
Mm-hmm.
of human rights and
all.
of all these
And social change.
of the Lumière, you know, like all Voltaire and all the ideas from French Revolution, and so I think it's very French to think that way of thinking is universal,
Mm-hmm.
which I do stick to a lot of those principles of these Republican and freedom and equality principles. But there is still something a little perverse about it, about trying to impose them to everybody.
Mm-hmm. It kind of becomes its own form of fascism, and if it can be pushed to that level.
It can be pushed to that level, yeah, of course. There's all discussion about the Muslim women wearing
the burqas.
Not the burqas, but like the voile, it's called the voile in France, about them being able to go to school and to public spaces wearing that, and I think that's a useless discussion. Because for me it comes from the principle that you're saying that these women really don't know what they're doing, and I don't agree with that. I don't think because you're of a different culture you don't know what you're doing in your life. I don't agree with wearing a veil myself. I wouldn't do it.
Right, but nobody's asking you to do it either.
And I think in a way it's a kind of it's oppression for women, but I don't agree of seeing them as unable to decide for themselves, which is a lot of the talk around this thing. Like, these women are forced by their husbands to work, and no, a lot of them make this personal choice. So,
especially in the context of living in France, it's not like they're living in a closed society in Afghanistan or something.
Yeah, and they
like
make
there's
that
differences.
Choice. Yeah,
right.
They make the choice. It's like a nun deciding to be a nun. I always make that comparison to get to the point. I go like, why will a Muslim woman shock you and a nun doesn't shock you?
Right.
And people go, it's different. And I go, why is it different?
Is it?
Yeah.
I mean, they're both, it's based in religious belief, tradition, and history.
And rules.
Extremely misogynist, patriarchal rules, structure.
Religious rules.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not really any different. We just respect the decision from one side, but not from the other.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
You just accept one because it's your culture and your religion, and you're not accepting that.
Right. So, I used to think that some of these ideas were very, when I was, primarily like growing up in the United States and experiencing that culture and stuff, I used to think, oh, these are primary things about U.S. culture, and then living in China and living in Mexico, you kind of like you get exposed to it, and I think particularly the pandemic has sort of like wiped away this ideal of like these things are nationalism, these things are this, and like giving us humanity back. Like, the pandemic has sort of leveled the playing field. We were all affected by it. Like there was no entitlement that really protected you. Well,
obviously in a way we're all equal.
Right, we're all equal.
Yeah.
And I mean the sort of like leveling of that, and then the ability to have focused conversations about like Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement, and all these different social and political topics that had existed well before that became the focal point. I don't know if it's because people couldn't, like there was nothing to escape to, you didn't have appointments to run to, or
It's funny how people get to realize that shit is really happening.
Right.
It's very strange. It's very strange because it's always been there. And I don't know, maybe we have to thank the social media and all this access to communication that we have for being able to acknowledge a lot of things and accept them and see them. But it's very funny how people suddenly realize, I have this conversation in France with a lot of people like, oh, there's racism in France. And I'm like, really? Like, it's just right now that you're realizing that? I'm like, because I lived 20 years in France and I used to have this conversation a lot, and because it really affected me.
Right.
I really felt I was different, and I was seen like a different person, and not with a nice gaze,
Right.
but an aggressive one. So I would keep on telling people that I was feeling that, and people were telling me that I was exaggerating all the time. I heard you're exaggerating, and there's no racism in France from a lot of people.
Well, I've heard that here,
and
my experiences here. I mean, I've experienced, as a blonde hair, blue-eyed, white male. I've experienced racism here related specifically to my appearance and the way that I stand out. And then when I say that to people are like, "Oh no, there's no racism here," and I'm like, "Like seriously?"
Yeah, well, you stand out. Yeah, you stand out because you're different. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You experience it. I mean, I often say to people, I think
you experience feeling different.
Right.
Which is, for me, it's another discussion. I think the anti-white racism is something that doesn't exist as such. I think it's more of how do you say,
a response.
Kind of a response to racism,
right.
to real racism, to real being discriminated because you have Indian.
And that's the way I contextualize it. I'm like, if you came to my country, I personally witnessed people saying, "Go back to your country." If you don't want to speak our language. And I've had that said to me here, and I'm like, well, that makes sense, because if you came to my country, we would say that to you too.
And I'm not defending them. I'm not justifying it, because I think it's unjustifiable in any case.
Right. But it is humanity.
I think it comes from a different place.
Right.
It doesn't come from feeling superior, like the way people would act towards you as an American, blue-eyed, white male in Mexico. Doesn't come from the same place as the racism that black people in the U.S. or in Europe
no, not at all.
Doesn't come from the same place.
No, because there's actual history of people who look like me doing horrible things. So I acknowledge that.
Yeah, and feeling superior, because it's a question of feeling superior. It's the Occidental superiority.
Sure.
So it comes from a different place.
So let's talk about that same idea of where things come from and put it back into the context of sexual violence and the experience as an artist talking about sexual violence from your perspective, because I think also when we translate our experiences into art as artists, there's a responsibility to bridge that gap and bring your viewers into it. How do you
Suddenly I have this feeling that I'm going to fall off the chair. It's very strange.
It's because the dog is there and you want to pet the dog.
No, I don't know if it's your question. And I'm
okay. That's why I was trying to draw it back to the art. I was like, we got to draw this back into the artwork. We veered into. I think it's really important.
Estamos dispersando en otras cosas, but everything is related.
Right, it's all related to the work. You can't talk about power dynamics in sex and not talk about power dynamics in race and power dynamics and finance.
They go hand in hand.
Right, that's what sort of bothers me about these conversations that people have. I'm like, they're all related. You can't divorce one thing from the other. You have to have a bigger conversation, and that's one of the things that really attracts me to the work that you produce. Is it's okay, well, this is a starting point. This is where you start from. You access it through the beauty. You acknowledge the materials. You can talk about it all formally, and then when you get to the message is the message. It's there. It's direct. It's not hidden. It's so the response of the audience is either I'm willing to have a conversation or the conversation is over and I'm going on to the next thing.
Yeah, well, I think people, I don't have a problem with art that you don't understand.
Yes.
And the problem with art that you have to read to understand.
The conceptual ideal is so strong that you can't even access it. You have to be a part of the community. Yeah, and
then you have these texts that are just incomprehensible and readable, and you go I feel kind of stupid right now because it happens. Sometimes I go to
the entire art world is built on it,
and I go I think this is like I'm not into that level of conceptual.
Right.
Because for me, concept is something that can be very concrete in the sense of political. I think everything is political at the end. Everything.
And I also think it's the responsibility of the artist to communicate.
Yeah. Totally.
Clearly, and like it's a magic trick that people do in the art world sometimes, where we're like, well, this is about my experience, and it's so personal that I don't feel like I should have to tell you. I want you to, and you're like, no, the work you can. I mean, like to me, like that kind of thing is just public masturbation. It's like, okay, well, that's great, thank you, but you exist in a world with other people, and you have an opportunity. I mean, to create art is an entitlement, because there are many talented people in the world who could be amazing and talented artists and never get the opportunity because of the circumstances of their life and
of course.
Class and system and all this. So here you are with the ability to create all this, and you own that responsibility. You own the responsibility to tell your story, to communicate within a community of stories, and to be clear in that communication, which I think you've accomplished magnificently. And I love like the fact that you acknowledge that there's a story. That's the primary sort of mission of the gallery. Here, this community that we have is about telling stories and revealing them and not allowing people to look away from the story.
Yeah. But you made me think about this because obviously they're autobiographical pieces. So, but what makes them interesting and gives them impact is that I'm not unique.
Right.
I'm not that artist unique that just like, oh, this is what I do, and you understand it the way you can, because I'm not unique in this story. It's like 95 or 98% of women who are involved in this. So I need to make the personal political, which is a very feminist saying.
How do you feel your work communicates to the other side of the gender?
To the perpetrators?
Well, not necessarily perpetrators,
that
because
would be interesting.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking more generalized, because obviously the perpetrators are going to have they have their own psychology around justifications about why they do it, and they might even look at it and not see themselves within it, literally or figuratively. But like, what do you want the experience of men to be when they look at this work?
I think I cannot pretend to like expect a specific reaction, but I can tell you of the experiences I had with men. So I had people like being men being very, very uncomfortable and not even being able to look at me in the eye anymore, which was very, very disturbing for me as a victim.
Well, and it must make you question like what their relationship is to the violence.
Which was very, very disturbing for me, that specific experience. And then you have men saying things like, oh, well, like shit happens and it's like individual things. I had someone telling me that.
Wow.
And then
that's
I had
like a
another
negation of all your experience and your processing of it and everything. Like that's very
It's very strange. And then I had someone else that came out of the video and just like he didn't know me, and he came and he just like took me in his arms and said, "Thank you so much for doing this." So I guess there's a whole bunch of, and I had men crying. A few men were crying when they came out of the video, especially. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What's next for you? Like, where are you going? What's your? I know you have an exhibition opening in Oaxaca.
Yeah.
Very soon, next week.
Next week,
right?
Yeah.
What do you like? What else is happening for you? Are you working on new work? Are you?
I have all this list of projects. I have a lot of projects. I'm working, particularly starting to work on a project on pedophilia.
On what?
On pedophiles.
Pedophilia. Okay.
Pedophilia, yeah. Which is a very big project.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, I'm finishing this project that you already know on the Amazon, on the effects of progress in the Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
which is also a subject that I'm totally passionate. My English is not that well today.
No, you're doing fine. I
sure.
totally hear you. I understand
Okay.
what you're saying. Don't worry.
And I have a whole bunch of projects. One is the print I saw you about Euro Trip, it's
Mm-hmm.
called, which is the whole thing on like a woman acknowledging her own pleasure and her own body,
Mm-hmm.
and the beauty of her own body, which is another project. There's a video project for that one also.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of things to say.
Like a very robust
a lot of things to say. Yeah.
Conversation.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very excited. I'm very honored by the trust that you give to the gallery to show your work and
Likewise.
Share your story with us, and so I invite everyone to come and visit. We're open on Saturdays from 2 to 6 for public, but also you can set an appointment at any time and come and see. We had people show up at 9 o'clock on Sunday night, like a group of 15 people. So, and we welcome them in. So
Okay.
I mean, we prefer appointments, obviously, but I'm like, don't refuse the opportunity for people to have an experience. I mean, we created these exhibitions to tell the stories that the artists were projecting forward, but also to show the diversity of the stories related to the human body and the experiences with the human body. So,
we're all bodies.
Yeah, we're all bodies.
We're all bodies. Yeah.
Body, mind, and spirit.
Yes.
That's all.
No, but we all have a body.
Yeah.
And we have to accept it, and we have to.
You
No,
know,
really.
I know, it's very interesting.
No.
Well, we could talk for days and hours, I'm sure, but
I think. Yeah.
every time we get together, we do this. So, like, we continue to talk.
That's true.
I think we're within the same spirit of things too. So, thank you so much
Thank you
for coming today and giving us your time.